Gute Woche. Before we get into the details of the Sichos, the structure of today's Farbrengen, the Farbrengen this afternoon, was different than the structure of a Farbrengen usually on a regular Shabbos until now. Usually, the pattern where the Rebbe speaks, the Sichos, is the first two Sichos, or sometimes even three Sichos, are related to the date, or to the parsha, or to the specific month we are in, or something like it. Then usually the Rebbe says the Maimer, the Sicha Maimer Sicha, and then afterwards the Rebbe begins to explain a Rashi, and a Rambam, and the Ha'oras of Levi Yitzchak, L'kutei Levi Yitzchak and the Zohar, as well as also during the summer months explaining the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos. Today, interesting, the Rebbe began the Farbrengen right away with explaining the Rashi. And it was in the second Sicha that the Rebbe right away led in to explain an in-depth explanation in Pirkei Avos of today, which is in the fourth Perek, in Perek Revi. Afterwards came the Maimer Sicha, and then afterwards was again a brief Sicha. And relatively, it was a much shorter Farbrengen than we've been having lately. It was before 4 that the entire Farbrengen was over. In fact, first Sicha, which was based on the first Rashi of this week's Chazarah, seems that last couple of weeks, last 2 weeks, and this is probably for the future as well, the Rebbe has given over, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that he will explain in the Farbrengens of Shabbos, expression was the V'hachai yitein el liboy, which as we already discussed, this is the phrase which the Rebbe has been using since the passing of the Rebbetzin, meaning the V'hachai, those alive, yitein el liboy, should take it to their heart, should give it to their hearts. In other words, what is the hero, the lesson, Hamaisa Hua'ika, which we can find in specific inyanim? The Rebbe said that he will discuss in Shabbos the Farbrengens the V'hachai yitein el liboy, which we find in the first Rashi of every Sedra. And this is in fact how the Rebbe began right away the Sicha today. The opening words of the first Sicha was that we will explain the V'hachai yitein el liboy in the first Rashi of Parshas Emor. Rashi tells us at the beginning of Parshas Emor, Emor ve'amarta, this is the quotation from the pasuk, because in the pasuk actually we find both expressions. We find the expression of Emor and also the expression of ve'amarta. Pasuk begins, Vayemer Hashem el Moshe, Emor ala koyanim, tell the koyanim, ve'amarta lahem, and you shall tell them, lanefesh le'itam abam. Why is it a double expression? Emor ve'amarta. Sorry, Rashi quotes the words Emor ala koyanim, and then Rashi goes on quoting 2 words from the pasuk, Emor ve'amarta, quoting words from the pasuk, lahazhir gdoila malaktani. Here we have a special directive from the Rebishter that the G'daylim, meaning the adults, are responsible for the Ktanim, for the youngsters, that the little ones should also, the little Koyanim, in other words, should also follow all these instructions which are related here in the Seder. And the Rebbe continued to explain this concept of Emor ve'amarta, lahazhir g'daylim ala ktanim, is something which we find in a few places in the Torah. We find it here. We also have it when the Torah tells us the prohibition of eating blood. And there's also an extra word in the pasuk, kol nefesh mikem lo yochel dam, any soul should not eat blood. Why does the Torah add on the word kol? Kol is a ribui, it comes to add on something. So Rashi there also comments that this comes to teach us lahazhir gedolim alaktanim, that it's making the adults responsible, it's cautioning the adults that they are responsible alaktanim on the youngsters. A third place where we find this inyan is regarding the prohibition of eating insects and worms. There, Chazal say the same, and interesting that Rashi does not quote this interpretation where the Torah is talking about the prohibition of eating insects and worms. So in two of the three places, Rashi does quote it, which is in this week's Sedre regarding the instruction for the Koyanim. Rashi tells us, Emor v'amarto lahazir g'dolim alaktanim, as well as when the Torah tells us the prohibition of eating blood. Rashi also tells us that there's an extra word of kol, and this is a ribu, it comes to teach us lahazir g'dolim alaktanim. However, by the prohibition of eating insects and worms, which Chazal also explain that it is lahazir g'dolim alaktanim, however, Rashi does not quote it in this page. And the Rebbe explained, here in our Sedre, actually, there's an extra word. V'amarta is extra, superfluous. Pasuk could have only said, Emor lakoyanim b'nei Yaron, relate to them, lenefesh le'yitama be'amav. Why does the Pasuk have to repeat again, v'amarta alayim? So being that there is something in the realm of pshuta shel mikra, in the realm of pshat, there is something which is not understood, there's an extra word here. So this question is arising in the derech halimud, in the way of learning of pshuta shel mikra. So Rashi is telling us, you know why there's an extra v'amarta? Because there's, Torah is telling us, Emor v'amarta. First of all, tell the Koyanim these details, but tell them something additional here. V'amarta, what should you tell them? That here there's an exception, lahazir g'dolim alaktan. The same thing when the Torah is telling us about the issur of eating blood. There's an extra word, kol. So the word is extra. So in Pshuta Shel Mikra, Rashi has to tell us, why does the Torah put a word which seems extra? And the reason for it is because over there as well, there's an instruction of lahazir g'dolim alaktan. However, the fact that the Torah tells us that we're prohibited to eat worms and insects, and there too Chazal say that this prohibition is also in such a format that the adults are responsible to see to it that the ktanim shouldn't eat it. Lahazir g'dolim alaktan. Over there we derive it not from an extra word. Over there we derive it from a specific expression in the pasuk. Pasuk says an expression, lo yoichal, and it could also be read lo yeochel, if I remember correctly the pasuk. It should not be eaten. Not only you shouldn't eat, it should not be eaten. Not being eaten includes everybody, even children as well. So not to touch there's an extra word in the pasuk. It's just that Chazal say that this word could be read differently than the regular creed, than the regular way that we read it. So in the realm of pshat, everything is simple and smooth. So there's no need for Rashi to get involved in it. And the Rebbe continued explaining that this inyan, normally, even a child is aware of it, a child who is learning Chumash, the child who is the student, and studying the Chumash, also knows that there are things which he is not allowed to do, or things which he is supposed to do. However, he's doing them because of chinuch. There's an inyan of training a child so that when he grows up and he's an adult, he should know what to do. But then, when the child is doing it, or he's not doing it, that's not a chiyuv min ha-Torah. It's not a chiyuv midaraisa. The only thing is we are educating him and we are bringing him up in such a way, we're educating him so that when he grows up and he becomes an adult and he becomes a bar mitzvah, so then he should know how to do everything properly. By these three areas, it's an exception. The exception is that the Torah says there's a responsibility on the adult Kohanim. For instance, here we're talking about the Kohanim. There's a responsibility lying on the adults of the Kohanim that they are responsible to see to it that the Ktanim should not be over, the Ktanim meaning even those under Bar Mitzvah, should not be Zich Metamer, or do anything which is prohibited for a Kohen to do. Which this is the exception in these three mitzvahs as opposed to all other mitzvahs. That there's a specific instruction that the Torah here is telling us that there's a responsibility on the adults to make sure that the Ktanim here are also acting like adults and are not doing anything wrong. This is as far as the Pshat and as far as the interpretation in this Inyan and in the Rashi. The Rebbe also brought to our attention that Rashi is using an expression lehazhir gdoila malaktanim. True, Rashi is quoting it from Chazal. But the fact that the Gemara in Yevamos uses this expression, this does not bind Rashi to use it. Rashi's inyan is pshuta shel mikra, to explain according to Pshat. So according to Pshat, when we want to be told that the adults are responsible for the youngsters, why does Rashi use the word lahazir? Lahazir means to caution, to warn. Actually, Amerva Amarta tell the Gdolim that they should make sure that the Ktanim are also acting properly. The Rebbe said that in Halacha, the word lahazir gives it some, not fully, but some sort of a status of a loisese. It goes into the category of a loisese, this responsibility, that they are responsible, the adults are responsible to see to it that the youngsters are not over on this Inyan as well. And if the youngster is over, then the adult is a kind of over on a loisese. Lehazir, the Rebbe says, is an expression which lends itself to an Inyan which is a loisese or pretty close to a loisese. Regarding the V'hacha yitein el liboy, which we can derive from this Inyan, meaning, as we just explained earlier, the lessons which we can derive from this. Rebbe says the lessons on these Inyanim are very obvious. We find the pasuk that the Rebbe told Yidden, even before Matan Torah, the Rebbe is telling Yidden, "Ve'atem tiuli mamleches koyanim v'goy kodesh," that all of Yidden are considered like a nation of koyanim. Here we are talking about the specific responsibilities to the Kohanim. The Rebbe is saying not only are these specific responsibilities to Kohanim, but it applies in a way to each and every Yid. Why? Because each and every Yid is called a Kohen. And just like by a Kohen, we know that Kohanim zrizim hein, Kohanim are very fast in the Avodah, the Beis HaMikdash, the Gemara says, and we know that there are extra mitzvahs which a Kohen had as opposed to an average Yid. To a Yisrael, they're the responsibilities that are on a Kohen. The same thing the Torah here is telling us. Emor ve'amarta. And this is a directive to each and every Yid. Lehazhir gedola malaktanim. That every Gadol is responsible for the cotton. In other words, it's the responsibility of every Yid to see to it that those that are still in the categories of Ktanim are also kept away from doing Averas. In other words, this Rebbe is leading to what the new which the Rebbe keeps on demanding from us at all times. And the Rebbe didn't spell it out in these letters today, but there's an expression which the Rebbe uses very often, quotes on behalf of the previous Rebbe, that by a Yid, when we look at age, we don't always look at age according to the passport. Passport usually has a person's date of birth. Age is we look upon the person's accomplishments. Sometimes they could be a person who may be older in age, but he's still called a kotel. And the same thing, somebody who may be younger in age, but he has gewaldige accomplishments, and he's called a gadol. So when we're talking here, the Torah is telling us in the ruchnius of of this whole Inyan. The Torah is telling us, Lahazir Gedolim Alaktanim. We should know that it is the responsibility of the Gedolim. And again, we're talking to each and every Yid. Why? Because every Yid is a member of the Mamleches Koyanim V'Goy Kodesh. Every Yid is considered a Koyan. So every Yid is to know that it is his responsibility to see that the Ktanim, those who are still considered the small ones, the youngsters, that they too are not doing anything which they shouldn't be doing, that they too are also following the proper path. This is regarding the Lahazir G'dayla Malaktanim which we have here. As we spoke earlier, there's another Lahazir G'dayla Malaktanim which we have by the inyan of blood, by the probation of eating blood. What's the inyan of blood? Ki hadam hu hanefesh, the pasuk says. That's the soul of the person. What's the pshat? Torah tells us there too, lahazir g'dayla malaktanim. So the Rebbe explains, there are many inyanim which affect the person, they affect the person's nefesh. They affect the person's soul. Just to name it, the Rebbe says, the Gemara says, for example, when a person is embarrassed, hamal b'mpnei chaveri, when one embarrasses somebody, it affects him to such a way that it's considered like you shedding the other person's blood. So when we're talking about the inyan of blood, it's not always when we're talking b'shaychus to the probation of eating blood. There's an inyan that has to do with blood when you embarrass somebody, when you hurt somebody, when you make somebody very inconvenient. All of these inyanim also deal with the blood of the person. Ki adam hu hanefesh. The taich is we are causing the person such an embarrassment that it's also compared to shedding blood. So we have to know that in these inyanim as well, we have to be extra careful. We have to make sure that we don't hurt anyone, we don't embarrass anyone, we don't cause anyone to be in a position that we should shed his blood, chas v'shalom. That's why the Torah also gives us an extra warning, lahazhir gedoyle malaktan. Back to the expression of lahazhir, Rabbi says lahazhir also has the expression in it, zohar, beside means to shine, lichtigkeit. In other words, when the G'daylim are watching out for the Ktanim, what are they doing? They are creating a certain illumination, a certain spiritual lichtigkeit. In other words, they are seeing to it that the Ktanim are also following the proper path of lichtigkeit. This, the Rebbe says, also corresponds to the inyan of Sfira. Sfira days which we are in now. So, Pasuk says, "Usfartem lochem emochas haShabbos," that we have to count the days of Sfira. So Chassidus teaches the word "usfartem," besides it meaning counting, also means sapir, lichtig machen, even sapir. A sapphire is stone that shines. In other words, what's the whole aved of Sfira Sa'imer? That we have only need of Sfira Sa'imer is that we are preparing ourselves for Matan Torah. So we have to bring ourselves up to such a level that each and every Yid should become like a stone that shines. In other words, also a source of lichtigkeit. That's the whole inyan of a Yid, to become a source of lichtigkeit, zoyhar, zu können lichtig machen, to make lichtig himself and to make lichtig his environment. And this corresponds to the same expression which is used by Rashi here, lehazhir g'doyle malaktanim. That when the g'doylim take care on the ktanim, what are they doing? They are also making lichtig, meloshen zoyhar. The Rebbe kept on quoting a pasuk, v'hamaskilim yazhiru ki zoyhar harikia, like the shine of the rakia, like the shine of heaven. In other words, the idea of lehazhir corresponds to the concept of lichtig machen, of lichtigkeit. Later the Rebbe continued that this Shabbos, like every Shabbos, elevates the entire week. That's the whole inyan of Shabbos. Shabbos elevates the entire past week. And this week we had Lag B'omer. And not just was Lag B'omer somewhere in the middle of the week or the beginning of the week. Lag B'omer was at the end of the week. Lag B'omer was Thursday. So from Thursday till Shabbos, it is within the same 3 days. And we know in halacha we find that within the same 3 days it has a special chivas, a special closeness is between Shabbos and something which happened so close to Shabbos, like Lag Baimer in this case, which Lag Baimer was on Thursday. Lag Baimer is the day of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, as we all know. Regarding Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Chazal tell us, Toirosoi Nosoi. What was his occupation? His occupation was Torah. He was always learning Torah. And the Rebbe explained, even though the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya that every Yid, whenever he learns Torah, the one who is learning Torah, by learning Torah, is becoming associated with the one who gave the Torah, the Noisen HaTorah, the Rabbeinu Shalom, which this is applicable to every Yid at every time that he learns Torah. How much more so is it when somebody is in a level of Toirosoi Nosoi, that Torah is his occupation? That means that this person has no other mitzias. There is nothing else around him other than the thing of Torah. Torah and him are totally united to such an extent that he can be described as Toirosoi Nosoi. Interesting, the Rebbe spoke Thursday night after he came back from the Yoel. After Ma'ariv in the Rebbe's house, the Rebbe spoke a Sicha, also about Lag Baimer. The Rebbe spoke Wednesday night, the Rebbe also spoke Thursday night. Thursday the Rebbe was on the Yoel almost 8 hours. And after coming back, and after davening Mincha and Ma'ariv, Rebbe spoke a Sicha, also talking about Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and explaining Reb Shimon ben Yochai being Toirosoi Nosoi. Rebbe said, even though the Gemara tells us there are many that try to do like Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and still they were not successful as far as Toirosoi Nosoi. In other words, this inyan of one's occupation being Torah, one's full-time occupation being Torah for a lifetime, is not a derech for every single person, as the Gemara tells us. But nonetheless, the Rebbe says, the time that each and every one of us sets aside to learn Torah daily, whether it is a full hour, or it is a half hour, or it is 18 minutes, whatever amount of time we take off from the day and we learn Torah during that time, the Rebbe says, the time that we are learning Torah, let that be in a way of Toirosoi Nosoi. In other words, when we are learning Torah, we have to be in such a way that there is nothing else in existence other than the Torah which we are learning, and therefore not to be interfered by anything else or disturbed by anything else. Why? Because Toirosoi Nosoi, the person who is learning, his occupation is Torah. True tak, it's not in a sense like by Reb Shimon ben Yochai, who was that way all hours of the day and of the night, and we are only in a position of being that way a small portion of the day, but at least this small portion of the day which we are taking off from the day to learn Torah, let that be in a way of Toirosoi Nosoi, meaning not to allow any type of interference, not to stop for anything, not to let anything interfere with us. These couple of minutes or half hour or hour which a person is giving for the learning of Torah on a daily basis, let that at least be in a way of Toirosoi Nosoi. Mentioning the Sikh of Thursday night, Rebbe also mentioned something interesting. The Rebbe says we are going from Lag Baimer, which is 33 days in the Omer, and we are entering into 34 days of the Omer. So Lag Baimer, everybody knows that it's a special day. Even a child is aware of it. Everybody knows it's special. However, when we are going from Lag into Lamed Dalet, one begins to think, what does 34 stand for? To such an extent that there's some that may even get scared. Why? Because in Hebrew we know that there's a word dal. Dal means someone who's extremely poor, a very strong definition of poverty is explained with the word dal. So here, the day before, we were in a madrega of Lag B'Omer. Comes the next day, what are we entering? Rabbi says, no, it is not dal. We are entering 34. 34 is twice 17. Taiv is equivalent to 17. Tes, Vav, and Beis. What does 34 stand for? 34 is twice Taiv. So Mamela, from Lag B'Omer, we are going into a yet higher madrege. To what madrege? To a level of twice Taiv. And the Rebbe says it's extremely significant this year, that this year, the day after Lag B'Omer was on a Friday. And in the creation of Friday, we also find that it is mentioned twice, Taiv, twice that the Rebbe created, he realized that it is Taiv, it is good. The Rebbe says, true, that one Taiv applies to Friday. The second Taiv applies to a total of whatever was created during the entire week. But nonetheless, both of these Taivs are mentioned on Friday. So Memele, it affects the Friday, that Friday has a double Taiv. But compared it, we find a similar concept in Halacha. In Halacha we find, regarding Korbanos which were brought in the Beis HaMikdash, we find that if it's a special day, for example, a Yontif, so it's brought in Halacha that Yontif will bring special Korbanos. So not only are the additional Korbanos special, but even the regular Korban which was brought on that day is also a special Korban. It affects the entire day. Same the Rebbe says, that being that the Toiv, true that it's a Toiv which is as a result of the creation of the entire week, but being that this is mentioned by Friday, so Taka has a special effect on the Friday. So Friday is also an Indian of double Toiv. Let us get back to today's Sikha. Now in today's Sikha, getting back to Reb Shimon ben Yochai, who was Torasa Yumnasai, his occupation was Torah. Especially regarding a Talmud Chacham, we find that a Talmud Chacham entire week he is referred to as Shabbos. Not only on Shabbos, but on the entire week is referred to as Shabbos. And especially when we're talking about a Talmud Chacham in the caliber of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. As there's another Chazal which the Rebbe quoted, Man pnei ha'odain havayeh. The Chazal interpret, who is considered ha'odain havayeh, in other words, similar to Hashem. Dar Reb Shimon ben Yochai. This is Reb Shimon ben Yochai. So from here again, Dar Ashbi. So here again we see the greatness of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Man pnei ha'odain havayeh. Who is ha'odain havayeh, which is a quotation from a pasuk, Dar Ashbi. And here mentioning the Indian of Shem Havayeh. Shem Havayeh is the Rebishter's name of Yud Kei Vav Kei. And this is composed of 4 letters. Rebbe says it's brought in Sfarim that another way to refer to the Shem of Yud Kei Vav Kei is by referring Shem ben Daled Oisius. Which name of the Rebishter that has 4 letters, it means the Shem Havayeh, the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. Even though the Rebbe right away added on, the Shem Adnai also has 4 letters. But nonetheless, we know that Shem Havayeh is a much stronger description of the Rebishter than the Shem Adnai. Talking on this Inyan of 4, that has a special shaykhs to today's Shabbos. Today's Shabbos in Pirkei Avos, it is the 4th Perek. And if we will open the 4th Perek, we will notice that the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos of the 4th Perek consists of 4 parts. There are 4 details in the first Mishnah of the 4th Perek, which is a quotation of Ben Zayma. Ben Zayma Omer, Ezahu Chacham, Halemid Mikol Adam. Who is considered wise? The one who learns from everyone. Shenema Mikol Melamda Hiskalti, Ki Disecha Sichali. I have learned from everyone.
In other words, the Rebbe teaches, what does it mean? Everyone, all those who taught me. Here we come to another Chazal. Chazal tell us that a person says, Harbe lama, it's a quotation also from Metane. Harbe lamadati meraboisai, I've learned a lot from my teachers, and yet more from my friends, and mitalmida yoisa mekolam, from my disciples I learned more than from everyone. Why? Because when a person relates to disciples, it's explained in Chassidus in depth. When he relates to Talmidim, this gives him the real proper understanding of the Inyan that he's relating. Memela, when we're talking here, Mikol Melamda Iskalti, all those who I have gained wisdom from, it means all those even as Talmidim. This Inyan is Inyan which requires a deeper understanding of Chassidus, but Bechlal in Chassidus it's explained that the Inyan of Chochmah has to do with the letter Yud of Shem Havai. Talking now the four letters that compose the Shem Havaya. Chachma has to do with letter Yud, based on what Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. Chachma means when a thought just begins to originate, and it is compared to a dot, to a spot. In other words, it has not been elaborated on yet, it has not been developed yet. The thought is just there, the original thought of the Chachma, the original idea on which it's going to be, on which later it'll be based on and carried through, and so forth. However, originally it is just the initial, the first step of the Dvar Chachma, and this is compared to the Inyan of Yud, which is also only a small letter. And as the Rebbe explains this Mishnah, Ben Zayma, and here he's talking about various categories, who's considered wise, who's considered strong, who's considered wealthy. It's not the Pshat the Rebbe saying that we're talking about four different people. The Pshat in the Mishnah here is we're talking about the same person. And the same person has different madrigas within himself. A person has a level of wisdom, a person has a level of strength, of wealth, and of kavod, as the Mishnah goes on. Then the Mishnah goes on to Ezehu Giber, this is already a further madrege, not how we're standing in the level of Chachma, but how we're standing in a further level. Hakovish es Yitzchi has to control his Yetzirah, meaning there is a Yetzirah that is interfering with him, and he's having war with the Yetzirah, and he's controlling the Yetzirah. Then we go down yet further. Ezel Osher, who is considered rich, Hasameach bechelkoi, the person who is satisfied with his share, has to be bechol levavcha. The Rebbe explained, we have to serve the Rebishter with both of our hearts, bishnei yitzarecha, with both yitzars. So Mamela, in other words, a person has to be affected in Gashmias as well, that his yitzhara should also be willing to serve the Rebishter. In other words, this is already how it is penetrating through the entire person, starting with the Svira Sachachma, with the Nekuda, with the spot of Chachma, the point of Chachma, then going through the K, which is the second letter in the Rebishter's name, and then it's having its Hamshacha, which is letter Vav. Vav always shows on Hamshacha, just like the Vav is a straight line. Then we are coming to the fourth madrege of Ezehu Mechubad, who is considered an honored person, HaMechabed es Abriyos. The last K of Shem Havai, it's explained in Chassidus, this deals with Sfiras HaMalchus. What's the Pshat Sfiras HaMalchus? This is already not how the person is within himself, but how the person is coming already on to a next person. What's the Inyan of Mechubad? Mechubad meaning honored. Honor is not something which is within a person. Honor, you always have to have another person to honor you. The first three madreges are still talking how the person is standing within himself. However, Ezel Mechuba, this corresponding to Sfiras Hamalchus, which is the last letter of Shem Havaya, HaMechabed es Abriyos, this is one who is honoring others, and this is how all of these four levels which are discussed in this Mishnah really correspond to the four levels that are expressed in the Shem Havaya, which consists of four letters. Again, this is an inyan which requires a deeper understanding in Chassidus. These inyanim are explained, four letters of Shem Havaya are explained at length in Chassidus, but we are just relating it briefly. was throughout the Farbrengen, the Rebbe did alert several times on the importance of this year, utilizing the year, that this is a year of Hakel, a special year. Also quoting the famous expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe that we have to putz our Knepplach, we have to shine our buttons. In other words, we're already at the final stage. Everything is ready and complete. We are waiting for Mashiach. All we have to do is we have to shine our buttons. As the Rebbe says, our buttons are already also shined. We have gone through this Aveda also. And especially we know the famous proclamation from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe in the first years that he was here in the United States proclaimed a motto, La'alter le'tshuva, la'alter le'gula. We should immediately do tshuva, and this will lead to immediate geula. And after these proclamations, and after we're already finished with the shining of the buttons, this madrega we have also passed through already. I mean, those that don't understand the concept, those that are unfamiliar, the basis of this expression, the Frierdiker Rebbe explained that every Yid is like a soldier in the army of the Rebishter. A soldier in the army has to make sure that all of his garments are perfect. His garments are clean, and there's no creases on them, there are no stains on them, to such an extent that even the buttons on his jackets also have to have the proper shine. So on this grounds, the Frierdiker Rebbe expressed himself, we are all ready. The only thing we are lacking, in other words, we're at the final stages already for the coming of Mashiach. The only thing we are lacking is we have to make sure that our buttons are polished properly, have the proper shine. The Rebbe keeps on saying that we have already gone through this Aveda as well. In fact, it was in one of the Farbrengens, not today, but recently where the Rebbe expressed himself that begashmius we see that when we shine a button and we polish it too much, it could lead to that the button should break. In other words, we have already done this Avodah, and the buttons have the proper shine. So let it not come to the breaking of the buttons. Let Mashiach come already. It's the time we're ready from all angles that Mashiach should come. Just to mention one more inyan which the Rebbe spoke, I think it was Wednesday night, regarding Lag B'Omer. Rebbe brought out an inyan. Chazal tell us that it was during the days of Sfira that the disciples of Rabbi Akiva passed away. And Chazal give us the reason why. That they were not respecting one another. Rebbe asked the question, we're talking about disciples of whom? Of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the one that instructs us that Avos Yisrael is a basic klal in the entire Torah. So who are the ones that are lacking Avos Yisrael? And who are the ones that are not honoring one another? Who are they? A group of people that are disciples of this Rabbi Akiva who is telling us and stressing the importance of Avos Yisrael. How does this go hand in hand? So Rebbe brought out, Chazal tell us that really two people are not alike. Ein de Yesein Shavis. Every person differs from another person. Now the disciples of Rabbi Akiva, each and every one had their special way, bimsilasa yala, as the Rebbe used the expression, their path of serving the Rebishter. And they were so strongly involved in their path of serving the Rebishter that they, each and every one of them, thought that this is the only and best way how one can serve the Rebishter. And when they realized that their colleagues who they were with were not following exactly their approach and their path of serving the Rebishter, this led to it that they didn't respect them. Why? It's not chas v'shalom that there was a hatred from one to another, as we would simply interpret it. Chas v'shalom. Each and every one felt that his level is the best way how one can become close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when he saw his colleagues and friends that they are not exactly going on the same path that he is going, so kind of this antagonized them to the extent that they were not honoring their friends. Why are you not doing it the same way I'm doing it? And this led to it that that they were not honoring one another. We get a complete different view on what Chazal say, that they were not honoring one another. Doesn't Chas v'Shalom mean in the simple sense that there was a hatred from one to another, or it's all based on their derech and avodas Hashem. But naturally, this is not the way to do it. The way to do it is every person has his approach, every person has his way to serve the Rebishter, has his path to get close to the Rebishter, and everyone goes his way. However, by them, they were so sincerely dedicated, each one of them, to their path in serving the Rebishter, that they felt that everyone else should also do it the same way. And that is why it led to Loinog Kovid Zebazah. Getting back to today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen that we are going from the days of Lag Baimer, and during Lag Baimer we saw that the great dedication which was put into making the Lag Baimer Tahaluchos and all the Lag Baimer outings, the Rebbe is obviously referring to all these outings which took place all over the world, were blessed with a lot of success, and all of this came as a result of the endless efforts which were put into it. And this brought to Yachad Yalde Yisrael, to united Yiddish Kinder all over. So this is a proper reminder for us now that we are before Matan Torah, to see to it that Matan Torah, Shavuos, is also a day that we make sure that all children should come to shul and attend shul on the first day of Shavuos. It's the day of Matan Torah, and to make sure that all Kinderlach should attend shul on the day of Shavuos. Another union which the Rebbe touched is being that we are before the summer months. Now is the proper time to see to it that all children receive a proper camping. In other words, that the camps that children spend their summers in should be such type of camps that are alpi kedusha, alpi tara. In other words, camps which are kosher camps and which are proper camps where a child should spend his vacation. In fact, the Rebbe said, not getting involved in the details, is the concept of vacation correct or isn't it correct? Let us not get into it. But being that there is vacation, so let us see that vacation should be utilized in a way that the child should be free from what? From all inyanim that are interfering with the child, and should have a positive, we should utilize the summer in the most positive way. The Rebbe concluded, we are going into the Sedra of Bahar, which began reading at Mincha this afternoon. Sedra of Bahar tells us at the beginning the details of Shemitah, of the sabbatical year, that once in 7 years we were prohibited to do field work in Eretz Yisrael. And the Torah begins, V'shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem. So the question is asked in Chassidus, we don't begin with the year of rest. We begin with 6 years of work. After 6 years of work, that is when we have the year of Shabbos. If you look into Chumash, you will see that first the Torah says, V'shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem. This is not the Seder, the way things go. Rabbi referred to what's explained in Chassidus. True, this is not the Gashmistic Seder how it goes. First we put in the 6 years of work, and later comes the year of Shemitah. However, a Yid has to know that what is his main goal. What are we aiming for? We're aiming for that after the 6 years of work, we will ultimately reach to the year of V'shav Sahar at Shabbos Lashem. Our goal is to come to the Shabbos year. Enoch, how can we achieve it? By putting in 6 years of work. Sheishanim tizras adechas, the pasuk goes on. However, what is our ultimate goal? To come to the Madrega V'shav Sahar at Shabbos Lashem. He did not explain. Zohar I referred to very briefly, very briefly, but a Rambam he didn't explain. He didn't do a Rambam today. It was, like I said, a very short Farbrengen.
Actually, at the very end, it looked a strange thing, like the Rebbe ended the Farbrengen, and then all of a sudden brought out the bottles. What was exactly going on there?
That's exactly what happened. He ended the Farbrengen and he gave out the bottles later.
Isn't it basically difference, or maybe I didn't understand, between the Le'aseh Gdolem Tanim, between the pasuk of Dam Lenefesh to this pasuk?
Between Dam and where? And here?
Right.
It's the same idea.
The same idea.
Same Lahazah Gdolim Alatanim. Yeah, but in Ruchnius it's two separate kinyanim. But the Ruchnius is explaining Dam, we shouldn't shed anybody's blood by embarrassing people, and something like similar, which is considered Shvichas Dam. And the Roeh from here is that every Yid is considered a Kohen, so every Yid is responsible for his. That's the V'achayit in Libra, right?
Habina relates to the middle.
Excuse me?
Pirkei Avos.
Pirkei Avos, Hey is the second one, the first K. Yud K. K, Chassidus always teaches the meaning of hispashtus, of spreading out. First you have the thought, how it says in Chochmah. Then it spreads out, that's like Bina. Here we're talking similar to the idea, he's kovish his Yitzchak, he's spreading out because he's controlling his Yitzhak. So it corresponds to letter Hey. And then comes Vav Hamshacha, it penetrates him to the effect, it goes through him that he becomes an Ashir as well, he's becoming rich, it's affecting his Gashmias, that even his Yetzirah is also satisfied. B'chol levavcha b'shnei Yetzirah.